The 24-Karat Buddha and Other Fables by Maxine Harris. The Sidran Institute Press of Baltimore, Maryland is the publisher. A language of your own. The land beyond the hills was a very remarkable place. Everyone there was born speaking in his very own language, and yet what made the community so unique was that every villager, man, woman, and child, had the ability to understand everyone else. This skill was so unusual that linguists came from all over the world to study the people who lived in the land beyond the hills. Professors from all the leading universities came with theories about how such a remarkable skill might have evolved, but no one knew for sure how this unique talent came to be. One day, a young man with ambitions for political power made a suggestion to the assembled leaders of the community. "We have a nice life here in the land beyond the hills," he began with a solicitous nod to the assembled representatives, "but we have no discourse with the outside world. Because we speak so many different languages, it is impossible for people living in other lands to do business with us. We need a single language for all of our people." "No, never," cried one agitated older man. "That is not our way. We have always each had our own language. It has never been different." "Well, perhaps," said another, "we could try to use one single language and see if we like things better that way." "Very interesting," pondered a well-dressed gentleman with a feather in his hat. Think of all the possibilities for trade and profit." The discussion went on for many hours as the assembled representatives debated the pros and cons of having just one language. Some said that the discussion went on for longer than it needed to because each speaker wanted the chance to say his or her mind, even if someone else had already made the same point. After all, the only time a villager heard his own language spoken was when he spoke it himself. Finally, one speaker offered a suggestion. "Why don't we see if we can agree on a common language? I propose that we spend the next 30 days trying to find the perfect language to represent all the people of our land. Those who think that their language is the best can try to convince others to speak as they do, and those who like the sound of another's language can try and see if they can learn a new way of communicating. At the end of 30 days, we will meet again and see if we are any closer to selecting a common language." Some members of the group started to object to the speaker's proposal, but most of the representatives were so exhausted and so eager to get home to their beds that the group agreed to try to find a language that might please everyone in the land. Of course, no one quite knew how he or she might go about doing that, but they agreed to the plan nonetheless. After a few days' rest, some of the more ambitious members of the community began to think of how they might succeed in getting their language adopted as the official language of the land. "I will pretend that I can understand no language but my own," thought one rather pompous gentleman who ran the largest store in town. "Then anyone who wants to speak with me and buy my goods will have to learn my language." He smiled to himself as he thought of how important he would be when his language became the language of the whole land. Another man, who was quite wealthy, decided to use his wealth to influence people to adopt his language instead of their own. He went to the center of town and began calling out, 50 gold pieces, 50 gold pieces. I will give 50 new gold pieces to any citizen of our land who gives up his own language and speaks as I do." Before long, there was a large crowd gathered around the speaker, and several people were attempting to imitate his speech so that they might be rewarded with the shiny coins. Two young lovers who had vowed to share everything with one another were practicing each other's languages, and a boy who did not like the sound of his own speech was trying to imitate the language of one of the town's most learned men. All over the land, people were busy either trying to convince their neighbors to speak as they did, or trying to imitate the speech of others. Some people who were afraid that their unique languages would be taken away from them decided that the best strategy was to speak to no one and to keep their language completely to themselves. Of course, That meant that they were all alone without anyone to talk to at all. For the entire 30 days, no work got done in all the land. No children went to school, and no business was conducted. Everyone was consumed with the task of choosing a common language. At the end of the 30 days, the town elders and representatives assembled to see what success they had had. Since everyone in the land was curious about the outcome of their deliberations, a large crowd of citizens followed them into the meeting hall. The ambitious young man who had suggested a common language in the first place began to speak. "My fellow citizens, we are here to discuss our progress in selecting a common language." He paused for a moment and looked out over the assembled crowd, expecting to see the usual agreement of nodding heads and eager smiles. But instead he saw only blank faces. "We are here to discuss our progress in selecting a common language," he repeated, only this time a little louder, thinking that perhaps his fellow citizens had not heard him the first time. But again he saw only blank faces, with a few frowns and furrowed brows. How strange, he thought. This is not like my countrymen at all. At just that moment, an angry-looking fellow rose to his feet and shouted, "Make sense or sit down. We cannot understand a word you're saying. You're talking nothing but gibberish. Make sense, man, or sit down." But the ambitious young man could not understand a word the angry speaker was saying. In fact, no one could. The crowd broke into a frenzy of chatter as everyone turned to his or her neighbor and tried to communicate. But no one could understand what anyone was saying. In their attempt to find a single language for everyone, the citizens of the land beyond the hills had completely lost the ability to understand one another. In the days and weeks following, townspeople tried desperately to communicate with one another. In the cafes, on the streets, and in the shops, people could be seen huddled together, trying to listen extra carefully to one another and trying to form strange words that might make sense to their partners. But all of these strategies failed. No one in the land beyond the hills could understand a single word spoken by anyone else, and no one had found a way to make himself understood by even his closest friends and family. After a while, most people just gave up and stopped trying to communicate at all. Some people wondered how they had gotten into such a mess, but no one had a solution for how to make things better. Several years passed, and the land beyond the hills became a very quiet place. People hardly spoke at all, since there was little point in trying to communicate. When people wanted something in a shop or a cafe, they would simply point or nod their heads, but no one said a word. One day, a young girl, who had been only a small child when all the chaos about a common language had stirred up, was walking along in the fields when she heard a very soft voice. Since she had never spoken to anyone before, she was at first startled by the strange sounds that seemed to be coming from some place deep inside her. "Speak!" commanded the voice. How silly, thought the young girl. There is no point in speaking because no one can even understand what I say. "Speak!" ordered the voice once again. This time the girl listened more closely to her voice. It seemed so adamant that she wondered if the voice had some secret knowledge. "But what shall I say?" asked the young girl. "No one in this land has spoken for a very long time. What can I, a young girl, possibly have to say?" "Speak from your heart," said the voice as it trailed off into silence. The young girl waited for more communication from her voice, but there was none. As she walked home, she thought about the strange message she had received from the voice inside her. Soon after, the young girl was visiting with her grandmother, who had baked some very special cookies for her visit. "Thank you for the wonderful cookies," said the girl without stopping to think about the fact that she was speaking. "I love you very much." All of a sudden, her grandmother looked up from her baking. She could not believe her ears. She had just heard her lovely granddaughter say, "I love you." Very tentatively, the grandmother formed the words, "I love you too, dear child." And she could see instantly from her granddaughter's expression that the young girl had understood her words. They began to chatter and laugh and talk some more. They had much to say to one another, for they had never spoken. And from that time on, whenever someone from the land beyond the hills spoke from the heart, they discovered that other people understood exactly what they were saying, no matter what language they spoke. A language of your own. We each began with the ability to speak what is on our minds. Children, in fact, are infamous for saying what they think with little regard for the social consequences. Yet somewhere along the way, in our desire to please others or to fit in with our peers, we may find that we silence the dialogue with our own inner voice. The estrangement from our own true voice may be so extreme that we even find ourselves unsure what we really think and feel, and looking to others to tell us what we are supposed to believe. The struggle to regain connection with one's inner voice may be particularly arduous. Sometimes a period of silence or stillness is required to allow the thoughts and feelings that live inside us to emerge clearly from the din of the noise around us. It requires courage to speak from the heart and to risk the disapproval of others who might want us to talk their language. But as with the girl in the story, the only chance we have for true communication is to speak simply and clearly from the heart.